Here's the situation that's laid out in Genesis, as far as I can tell, is that people emerge as self-conscious, and that produces a terrible burden on people, and then the burden is even either handled in the appropriate manner with the proper sacrifices, or it's not. If it's not, the consequences are that everything degenerates into brutality and atrocity. And that seems to me to be approximately correct. And so you can understand both Cain and Abel's motivations. You know, Cain gets brutal and resentful because things don't go well for him and because he's suffering. And it might be arbitrary, you know, and sometimes your suffering does seem to be entirely arbitrary. But part of the moral of the story is that if you allow that to make you resentful and vengeful, that you'll participate in processes that make things absolutely unbearable and make the entire situation much worse. And all the existential commentary I've read on the things that happened in the Second World War and in the Stalinist Soviet Union and in China for that matter seem to lay out exactly the same story, which is once individuals get corrupted because they're unhappy with the structure of their being, they can corrupt the entire social landscape and the entire world, and things go from bad to worse until they're as bad as they can possibly be. So that's how things go badly. You might think, well, how do things go well? And it doesn't seem to me that it's reasonable to try to impose an ideological solution on the world. And the reason that that's not reasonable is because it leads you into something that's akin to a sin of pride. You think you have the damn answer. You think you know everything. And you can impose that answer, but the problem with that is that it seems to, that's the kind of sacrifice, or that produces the kind of sacrifices that God doesn't find very acceptable. And things go from bad to worse. And so you might say, well, what's the alternative? What's a potential alternative mode of being? And so here's something that you can think about. There's one thing that I want to tell you about Christianity that's relevant in this regard. So you'll see this in the last quarter of Maps of Meaning when you read it. But there's images that have popped up in the Middle Ages where the tree in the Garden of Eden is there again, and on the one side of the tree there are skulls, and those are being handed out by Eve. And on the other side there are these little things they're like fruits, but they're representatives of the hosts that are given to people when they undergo the Mass in Christianity. And so those little hosts, which are made out of wheat, which is a dying and resurrecting God, are like the body of the hero. And so the idea behind the Mass is that in order to overcome death, you're supposed to incorporate the body of the hero. And the body of the hero is the person in this mythological landscape who is willing to voluntarily confront death and will, as a consequence, be reborn. Now, I think that can be read at a psychological level, because we already talked about the fact that one of the things that happens that when you're in deep error is that you can allow the erroneous structure to dissolve into something that's chaotic and then have it reemerge as something that's new. The idea that's lurking behind this idea of transformation is that you should identify yourself not with the initial state of order, which is like a particular way of looking at the world, and you shouldn't identify yourself with the state of chaos that's there when everything collapses around you, but that you should identify yourself with the process of transformation from order through chaos and then into a new form of being. And so the way that you confront the fact that reality is continually transforming is by allowing yourself to transform with it. And that's the taking on of the voluntary, of continual voluntary death and rebirth in the service of higher being. And we don't know the potential limits to that. You know, I mean, obviously in the current situation, everyone is still faced with the possibility of ill health and a finite lifespan and all the things that go along with that. But we don't know the limits of our potential dynamic flexibility, and we sure do know that if you hold on to ways of being that are counterproductive for any length of time, that kills you faster and makes you more miserable while it's happening.